Have you ever wondered what happens when hunger eats away at the human soul? When the body starves so badly that something darker steps inside? There's an old legend whispered across the Great Lakes, one that settlers carried with them in fear and native tribes spoke of with quiet warnings. They called it the Wendigo, a spirit born of famine, greed, and winter's cruelty. And once it claimed a man, there was no turning back. This isn't just folklore carved into the trees or passed down by firelight. There are stories, real ones, documented in journals and police records, and in the terrified recollections of those who lived long enough to tell. The most chilling of them came from the winter of 1896, when a small settlement on the edge of Minnesota's North Woods vanished without explanation. To this day, no one speaks of it, but the story lingers like a shadow that refuses to leave. It began with a man named Elijah Harper. Elijah was no stranger to the wild. A trapper, strong and stubborn, he had spent years trading with the Ojibwa people along the frozen rivers. But that winter, the cold came early and cruel. Snow buried the cabins before the harvest could be stored, and by December, the settlement supplies were running low. Neighbors gathered at Elijah's cabin on the outskirts of the village, voices hushed, eyes hollow with hunger. He told them the same thing he always did. We'll survive. We always do. Yet in the silence after, he heard the words the elders had warned about long ago. When the hunger is stronger than the man, the Wendigo comes. At first, no one dared speak of it. But the signs were there. Cattle were found mutilated, their bodies torn apart as though by wild beasts. Tracks appeared in the snow, too large for a wolf, too heavy for a man. One woman swore she heard scratching at her roof at night, like claws dragging over the shingles. Another claimed to see a gaunt figure at the tree 1 taller than any man, with eyes that burned like dying coals. And then came the disappearances. A boy of 12 vanished while collecting firewood, his sled abandoned in the snow. Search parties found no trace of him. Days later, a hunter stumbled home shaking, his face pale as bone. He said he found something deep in the woods, a rib cage hanging from a pine branch, picked clean as if by fire, but no sign of an animal nearby. He swore the snow around it was pressed down with human footprints, though each step was impossibly long. The settlement began to crumble under fear. Some packed what little they had and fled south. Others barricaded their doors at night, refusing to step outside once the sun set. But Elijah stayed. He believed in hard winters, not in monsters. Until one night when he heard it for himself. It started as a wail-long, mournful, cutting through the trees like a woman's cry. Then it twisted into something unnatural, a scream that seemed to rattle his bones. Elijah grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, the snow crunching under his boots. The moon was pale, casting the forest in silver light. That's when he saw it. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure. Its body was impossibly thin, its skin stretched tight across jagged bones. Its lips were torn ragged as though chewed away. And when it opened its mouth, Elijah saw not teeth but shards like splintered ice. The creature moved with jerks and shudders, as though it had once been human but had forgotten how to walk. Elijah raised his rifle. His finger trembled on the trigger. But before he could fire, the thing vanished into the tree line, leaving only the echo of its wail behind. That night, Elijah could not sleep. He remembered the warnings the Ojibwa elders had told him years ago. The Wendigo is the hunger that never ends. It wears the face of the man it once was, and it will always be searching for flesh, for souls, for you. When dawn came, Elijah saddled his horse and rode to the nearest town to send word to the authorities. But by the time help arrived, the settlement was silent. Doors swung open on their hinges. Snow had drifted into cabins where fires had burned out long ago. And in the center of the village, the searchers found something carved into the wooden post of Elijah's cabin. One word, scratched deep and ragged, as though written by claws rather than hands. Wendigo, and Elijah. He was never seen again. But the story doesn't end there, because in the winters that followed, hunters, travelers, and even soldiers reported strange sightings in those very woods. And always, they began the same way, with hunger, with isolation, and with a sound carried on the frozen wind that made men's hearts stop cold. And this is where our story truly begins. The sheriff who rode out to the settlement in early January of 1897 was a man named Thomas Rourke. He had seen his share of violence on the frontier drunken brawls, killings over land, even a lynching or two, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found among those snowbound cabins. The place felt wrong the moment he arrived. The wind cut sharp through the trees, carrying a silence too heavy for a living town. No smoke curled from chimneys, no voices called out. Instead, there was only the creak of wooden doors banging against their frames and the hollow whistle of snow sweeping through empty windows. Rourke and his 2 deputies dismounted and began their search. Inside the first cabin, they found a table set for dinner. Plates of frozen food sat untouched, covered in frost. A chair was overturned, as if someone had leapt from it in fear. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass, just absence. The second cabin was worse. Bundles of clothes and blankets were scattered across the floor, as though people had been packing in a hurry. The bed was stripped, and in the center of the room lay a single boot, its leather chewed through as if gnawed. Rourke lifted it with his gloved hand, staring at the ragged bite marks. The deputies said nothing, but their eyes told the same story. Something was terribly, unnaturally wrong. They pressed on, moving toward Elijah Harper's cabin. The door was ajar, the hinges clawed with deep scratches that cut through wood and paint alike. Inside, they found the carved word Wendigo, just as the townsfolk had claimed. The letters seemed to pulse in the dim light, jagged, furious, gouged so deep that wood splinters still clung to the grooves. Rourke swallowed hard. "This ain't no prank," he muttered. His voice echoed strangely in the empty room. Then Deputy Collins noticed something else. In the corner of the cabin, beneath a pile of furs, lay a journal. The leather cover was torn, the pages stiff with frost. It belonged to Elijah. Rourke flipped it open and began to read aloud, his voice breaking the suffocating silence. December 14th, supplies low. Men argue at night. Heard something moving outside the cabin, too heavy for gear, tracks too long. I don't want to believe what the elders said. December 18th, Mrs. Calloway swears she saw something at her window, skin stretched thin as bark. I tell her she's mistaken, but I saw it too last night at the tree line, staring, always staring. December 23rd, the boy is gone. We searched, but only found his sled. The woods feel wrong, like they're holding their breath. December 29th, something screams at night. I thought it was an animal, but the voice is human. God help us, it sounds like someone we know. The journal ended there. Pages after were smeared, the ink run wild as if soaked in water or blood. The deputies shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Collins spat into the snow. This is madness. Some story to scare us off. Folks just packed up and left, but Rourke wasn't so sure. He had been a lawman long enough to tell when fear was painted on paper. Elijah hadn't been lying. That night, they made camp in the largest cabin, building a fire and barricading the door against the storm. The wind howled outside, dragging snow across the shutters in long, bony fingers. None of them spoke much. The image of that word Wendigo scratched into the wood hung heavy in their minds. Sometime after midnight, Rourke woke to a sound. It was faint, almost delicate, at first like tapping on glass. He rose slowly, hand resting on his revolver, and crossed to the window. A shadow moved past the glass, thin, tall, too tall. He froze, heart hammering. The fire behind him crackled, casting light that caught the frost on the window. And then he saw it, two eyes burning faintly in the dark, set deep into a face too narrow, too sharp. The tapping came again, only it wasn't tapping. It was claws. Rourke stumbled back, drawing his revolver, just as Collins bolted upright from his bedroll. "Did you see it?" he gasped. Before Rourke could answer, the cabin door shuddered violently. Once, twice. The wood groaned against the impact, snow sifting from the rafters. Then came the sound of a wail that cut through the storm, high and piercing, like a man screaming and an animal howling all at once. The deputies clutched their rifles, faces pale. "What in God's name is out there?" Rourke swallowed, forcing the words past his dry throat. "Not what, Collins? Who?" The pounding ceased. The wind rushed in sudden silence. They waited, breath held, ears straining, and then nothing. When dawn came, the snow outside the cabin was disturbed. Tracks led from the tree line to the door, pressed deep into the frost. They were human in shape, but elongated, stretched, as if the bones themselves had grown wrong. The trail led away again, vanishing into the dense woods. Rourke knelt in the snow, staring at them. His breath came in clouds, white against the blue morning light. "It's not gone," he whispered. "It's waiting." The deputies looked at him in disbelief. But deep down, in the hollow of their fear, they knew he was right. Because the Wendigo never leaves. It waits. It watches. And once it finds you, it follows until hunger has its due. That's part 2, approximately 850 words. Tensio. Sheriff Rourke wanted to leave. Every bone in his body told him to turn his horse south and never look back. But something stronger held him there, the gnawing need to understand what had happened to the people of this settlement. Lawman didn't walk away from mysteries. And besides, if there really was something stalking these woods, running wouldn't save him. The deputies weren't so sure. Collins paced, muttering prayers under his breath. The younger one, Miller, kept polishing his rifle as if the steel could protect him from whatever clawed at their doors the night before. By afternoon, the storm broke. The men saddled their horses and set out to follow the trail. Snow crunched underhoof, each step sinking into the same unnatural prints. The forest was silent except for the groan of trees shifting beneath their weight of ice. It felt like the world itself was listening. The tracks led deeper into the pines, winding past frozen streams and jagged outcroppings of rock. After hours, the men came upon something that froze them in place. A clearing. In the center stood a carcass, what was left of a deer, strung up between two trees. Its ribcage was cracked open, its inside scooped clean, not eaten like prey. Torn apart, piece by piece, with a hunger that seemed endless. Miller gagged and turned away. "This ain't right," he whispered. "No animal does that." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Not an animal." They pressed on, though dread hung heavy in their chests. As night began to fall, the air grew sharper, colder, and the forest closed in tight. Shadows stretched long across the snow, and somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. They weren't alone. Collins raised his rifle. "Sheriff." Rourke held up a hand. They waited. The wind stirred, carrying with it a sound that made the blood in their veins turn to ice. It was a voice. Elijah. The whisper floated through the trees, drawn out and hollow, as if spoken by someone whose throat had long rotted away. Miller's hands shook. "You heard that?" Another whisper, closer this time. "Collins." Collins cursed under his breath, spinning in circles. "It knows my name. God help us, it knows our names." Then the wail came again, high and human, so loud it seemed to tear through the woods. Horses reared, screaming, and in the chaos, Miller's mount bolted, carrying him into the trees. His shouts faded, swallowed by the forest. "Damn it!" Rourke yelled, spurring after him, Collins close behind. Branches whipped at their faces as they chased the echo of hooves, but the snowstorm was returning, thick flakes blinding their sight. By the time they reached another clearing, Miller was gone. Only his horse stood there, reins tangled around a stump. The saddle was empty. Colin stumbled off his horse, frantic. "Miller, Miller, answer me!" His voice cracked. The woods gave no reply until a sound drifted back. A laugh, thin, raspy, broken. And then from the far side of the clearing, Miller appeared, at least what was left of him. He staggered forward on trembling legs, his face pale, his eyes wide and empty. His lips were torn, as though ripped apart from within. Collins ran to him, but Rourke shouted, "Stop!" Too late. Miller raised his head, and what looked back at them was no longer their deputy. His jaw hung at an impossible angle, teeth jagged and sharp, skin stretched taut across bones that jutted like knives. His breath steamed in the cold, heavy, ragged, each exhale carrying a smell like rot. And his voice, when it came, it was not his own. Hungry. Collins screamed and fired his rifle, the shot echoing like thunder through the woods. Miller, or the thing that wore his body, lurched backward, then straightened again, the wound steaming but not bleeding. His neck snapped sideways, too far, and then he rushed them. Rourke fired twice into the thing's chest. It shrieked, the sound rattling the branches, and collapsed into the snow. Its body twitched, spasmed, and then went still. Silence returned. Collins dropped to his knees, sobbing. It killed him, took him over. That was Miller. Rourke's hands shook as he reloaded. No, that wasn't Miller anymore. They stood over the body as snow began to cover it, white against the twisted, ruined form. And yet, even as Rourke stared at it, he felt no relief. Deep inside, he knew it wasn't finished. The Wendigo never stopped with one. The storm thickened. Visibility dropped. Collins clutched his rifle like a lifeline. "Sheriff, we gotta get out of here. This ain't a fight we can win." But when Rourke looked back at the clearing, Miller's body was gone, dragged into the trees, leaving behind a streak of red melting into the snow. And somewhere in that endless forest, the Wendigo laughed again. Sheriff Rourke and Deputy Collins didn't speak for a long while after Miller vanished into the trees. The storm roared around them, snow falling so heavy it felt like the whole world was dissolving into white. But even louder than the wind, louder than the crack of branches, was the silence between their breaths. The Wendigo was hunting them. Rourke gritted his teeth and forced his horse forward, back toward the settlement. Collins rode close, his rifle clutched so tightly his knuckles shone pale through the leather of his gloves. Neither man dared look back, though both felt the eyes on them, burning, hollow, patient. By the time they reached the first cabins, night had swallowed the sky. They stumbled inside one of the sturdier homes and bolted the door, stacking furniture against it. Collins collapsed by the fire, his face ashen. "We won't make it through the night," he muttered. "It'll come. It always comes," Rourke paced, jaw clenched. "We faced worse." "No," Collins said sharply, his voice cracking. "Not worse. Men kill for money, for drink, for rage. But this thing, it kills because it needs, because hunger is all it knows. You saw Miller, you saw what it made him." Rourke had no answer. The crackle of the fire filled the silence, mingling with the moan of the wind outside. Then came another sound, faint at first, scratching, long claws dragging slowly across the wooden walls of the cabin. Collins leapt to his feet, rifle aimed at the door. His breath came in ragged bursts, clouding in the cold air. The scratching moved, circling the cabin, steady and deliberate. Then came the whisper, "Rourke," his name spoken in Miller's voice. The sheriff's blood ran cold. Collins cursed, pressing his back against the wall. The whisper came again, drawn out, mocking. "Rourke." "Hungry." And then the pounding began. The door shook, rattled, splintering under the force of something that hit it again and again. The barricade shivered. Snow sifted from the rafters above. Collins screamed and fired through the wood, the blast deafening inside the small cabin. The pounding stopped. Silence. The two men stood frozen, hearts hammering. Rourke's hand hovered at his revolver. He swallowed hard. Reload. Collins fumbled with shaking hands, feeding rounds into the chamber. That's when the window shattered. A clawed handskin gray, bone sharp burst through, swiping wildly. Collins fired point blank, blowing it back into the night. The scream that followed was like nothing human, a shriek that rattled the glass and drove pain through their ears. The thing was on the roof now, its weight bowing the beams, its claws dragging slow and steady. The men looked at each other, terror mirrored in their eyes. "We run," Rourke said. Collins shook his head violently. "We won't make it. We die if we stay." Before Collins could protest, the roof split open. Snow and splinters rained down as the Wendigo dropped into the cabin. It was larger now. Taller than any man, its body twisted with unnatural hunger. Its ribs jutted out, its jaw unhinged too wide, and its eyes sunken, burning coals locked on them with a hunger that froze the blood in their veins. Rourke fired, Collins fired. The bullets ripped into its body, but it only staggered, shrieking before lunging forward. Its claws slashed, catching Collins across the chest. He screamed, blood spraying across the snow-dusted floor. "Collins!" Rourke roared, dragging him toward the door. He shoved it open, the barricade tumbling aside, and the two men burst into the storm. They ran. Through the snow, through the trees, stumbling, bleeding, barely alive. Behind them, the Wendigo howled, the sound chasing them through the forest, closer, closer. Collins faltered, collapsing into the snow. His blood trailed dark against the white. "Leave me," he gasped. "It wants me." "You can still..." "Shut up," Rourke barked, hauling him up. "We both make it." But Collins's eyes were already glazing, his body going limp. And then, in the storm, he whispered words that made Rourke's heart stop. "Hungry." Collins's mouth split too wide. His jaw cracked, teeth sharpening before Rourke's very eyes. His skin stretched tight, his voice warped, the transformation beginning. Rourke stumbled back, horror choking him. No, not you." Collins screamed a scream that twisted into a Wendigo's cry. He lunged, claws swiping. Rourke drew his revolver and fired. Once. Twice. The third shot dropped him into the snow. Collins twitched, body spasming before finally going still. His eyes, once his friends, were empty now. Rourke staggered back, sobbing, before he realized the woods were silent. Too silent. The Wendigo was still out there. He stumbled blindly through the storm until at last he found the frozen river. His horse, miraculously, stood tethered where they had left it. With the last of his strength, he mounted and rode hard south, never once looking back. When he returned to town days later, he was half dead from frostbite and exhaustion. The doctor saved his body, but not his mind. He told them what had happened, what he had seen. They wrote it off as madness, fever dreams from the cold. No one believed him, but Rourke never returned to those woods. And for years after, travelers vanished along that frozen stretch of wilderness. Hunters swore they saw figures at the tree lying gaunt, hollow-eyed, with jaws too wide and limbs too long. Always watching. Always waiting. The Ojibwa elders had warned them. The Wendigo is not just a monster, it is hunger itself. It slips into men when the cold starves them, when desperation eats their souls. Once it takes root, there is no return. Sheriff Thomas Rourke died in an asylum in 1903. His last words, scrawled in a trembling hand, were found etched into the wall of his cell. It never stops. It waits for winter. It waits for me. And some say, when the snow falls thick across Minnesota's north woods, you can still hear the wail on the wind, half man, half beast crying out in voices you once loved. The Wendigo never dies. It just waits to be hungry again,